All right, my friends, the seat rails are out, and I'm about to show you guys the best way to do it. Stick around. All right, my friends, as mentioned, I have removed the seat rails from my 2018 Chevy passenger 3500 Motovan. So with that in mind, these rails give a lot of people problems. So I'm going to tell you guys about the method that I chose, and we're going to run down what some other people do and some other videos and other research that I found. All right, first let's talk about some methods of the rail removal that other people do that have had problems with. So these are the rails. If you guys have a passenger van or thinking about buying a passenger van, once the seat and carpet are out, these are the rails that are exposed. This is what you're going to see right here from inside the van. So obviously what you're not going to see is the stamped attached stud that goes through the bottom plate. So multiple methods on removing these, and pretty much none of them are easy. I think I personally found the easiest way to do it, but we'll see. You know, everybody's going to try their different method. So the most common method for what people do is they will take a circular bit and they will cut the top out of this top plate. So this is 1/4-inch steel. It is very thick, very heavy. I'm actually excited about the weight savings because these things are super heavy. But this is going to cut a hole once you identify the head of the stud through a light and figure out where it's at while it's in the van. They're going to cut a hole through the top plate to access the stud, which the stud head, let me see if you guys can see that in there. It's actually like a bolt head, it's just smooth. And then once the hole exposes the head, then they get a bit and drill it all the way out to basically eliminate that stud. So what they do is they do that for every single stud that they cannot unbolt. So if you guys are looking at this, just on this long rail alone, you're looking at 4, 6, 8, 10, so around 13, 14 studs. Now, not all of them that you have to do this to. You can actually unbolt quite a few. So I'm going to talk about that as well. So this drilling method ultimately only comes down to the ones that you cannot get to from unbolting. All right, so let's talk about that. All right, in the van, what you're going to see is you're going to expose 3 short rails, 1, 2, and 3. And then there's going to be 2 long rails, 1 and 2. So the way this is going to work is essentially you're going to crawl under the van and see what bolts you can access. Now I got to admit, it's the more MacGyver you get for reaching these bolts, or well, I say bolts, they're nuts, right? The more MacGyver you get of reaching these nuts and able to unscrew them, the less you don't have, the less you have to work to do any other method. Once you unbolt, if you could unbolt all of them, that would be the most advantageous, but you just can't do that. For the main reason is there's multiple shields, heat shields, fuel tank, all that stuff, suspension components, that's all bolted on. These rails are bolted on before, in my opinion, probably before anything else. And when the chassis is bare, they bolt these rails on. And then they probably do rails and then this giant under heat shield that has multiple pieces. So the heat shield just doesn't come off easily in one piece. A lot of the nuts are very, very hard to get to. So you have to contend with that. But what I found is this driver's side long rail completely exposed on my 2018. I can unbolt everything, pulled it right out. I want to say these short guys, 2 of the short guys, I could basically do the same thing, right? I could pretty much unbolt most all of them. This long passenger rail was 100% the hardest one, right? So you're going to have one or two that you would have to drill out on the short rails, and then pretty much 7, 8 to 10 on the long rail, because it's completely hidden. So that is basically what we're contending with. Also, it's very, very hard to identify where everything's at underneath. So you kind of have to play a game of cat and mouse of going on top and using your flashlight to identify the stud, align that with a body component, and kind of come over laterally. So the more methodical you are, the better. So let's get under the van and I'll show you what my method was. All right, my friends, we're under the van, and this is a perfect example of one of the holes that was where the stud was coming through, that the nut was totally exposed. 100% easy to get to, nothing to it. And this was the, I want to say that, yeah, this was the end of the short rail all the way on the passenger side. So a lot of these were easy to get to. So instead of drilling out the ones that you weren't able to get to because of all of these underside body panel, heat shields, fuel tank, all this other stuff, let me show you what I did. So right here, you'll see the heat shield is in the way. So this heat shield is stamped, and it has these like proprietary screws that these grommets, these hardened grommets, are stamped into the heat shield, and then a nut comes in from the top side. This was done early in production. I'd say this heat shield was assembled and then brought into the rest of the body. So there's really no getting it off. So what I chose to do, and in my opinion, I'm wondering why a lot of people didn't think of this. This is very thin heat shield. You know, it's stainless steel, but it's very thin, probably 1/16. Yeah, maybe more. It's probably 1/16. So all I did was I took a hole saw and some drill bits, certain size, and I'll show you guys the tools I used, drilled a hole through the heat shield to access the nut. So once I figured out, you know, this is the structural frame, here's a hole, and then I know there's going to be a hole right here because I can correlate it up from the top side of where the head would be coming down of the stud. So this is the technique that I used all the way down through. Now you can see here, drilled a hole. Over on this side, this cross member was hands down the hardest part, because this nut was like up in under the cross member. So what did I have to do? Punched a hole and then used dikes and pliers to pull away the heat shield and then access it with a wrench. Same on the other side, same. And then ultimately I could access the one up there. So some of these you can access. So my question to a lot of people that go through and drill out, spend hours and hours going through bits and whole circular bits, cutting through 1/4-inch steel, and then drilling through a grade 10 stud, because these studs are what's mounting the seat rails. So they're DOT hardened steel, 100%, right? So this stuff is, it literally holds the seats into the frame, into the body. So is it easier to drill that out, or is it easier to just cut a hole in the heat shield? So some people would say, well, the heat shield's mangled now. Oh, okay. So if that's the case, like, I can get what some people were thinking, right? So first of all, this heat shield is solid. It's not going anywhere. There's no rattles. I'll clean some of this stuff up, maybe bend it back and make sure, right? It's not going to allow any more heat in than what previously it would. And even if it did a little bit, it's not going to make a difference, right? These small holes in the heat shielding are not going to affect the overall temperature and body of the van holistically. So this was my method. I personally found it to be time consuming, but there's no method that isn't time consuming. There's no method that's going to make this process easy. So what I found was drilling holes in thin 1/16 inch heat shielding to access the nuts, instead of getting crazy on the top side, cutting through 1/4-inch steel and then drilling out a hardened stud. Not to mention, once you drill it out, all those parts in the nut falls through and they're left rattling around here on the top side of the heat shield. Whether that'll matter or not, I don't know, but in any case, I would rather not have that debris just sitting under there rattling around. So this is what I did, and it worked. So let's go look at the tools that I used. All right, these are the tools that I used. So very basic, very straightforward. Let's talk about cutting the holes in the heat shielding. Cordless drill, easy. Circle bit, this is actually a wood bit, but you know what? It doesn't matter because that heat shielding is so thin, a wood bit's gonna chew right through it, is what this did. No issues. A stepper bit, if you have one, this is a hardened stepper bit. These stepper bits are really, really good. I will say with any bit that's long, be very cognizant. Once you make the hole, I would switch over to this guy because these stepper bits are super effective. You can punch through and make a new hole in the van if you're not careful, which I actually made a little tiny hole up front that I'm going to have to plug as well whenever I go through and plug all these holes. So that's pretty much what I used for drilling holes in the sheet metal of the heat shields. Now, along with that, and as an assortment of dikes, pliers, needle nose, and just your regular channel locks, right? I use that to kind of pry and manipulate the heat shielding out of the way whenever I didn't want to grab it with my bare hands. So also, all of these nuts are 15 millimeter. So with the ones you have to unbolt, which is in this method is freaking all of them because we're not drilling any of them out, you want an assortment, and I do mean an assortment of different extensions, ratchets, swivel head ratchet, and wrenches. So this is a ratchet wrench in a 15 millimeter. So a lot of you guys have the swiveling head ratchet wrenches. I need a set of those because this did okay. The swiveling head ratchet wrench definitely would have done a lot better. You'll definitely want a deep well socket 15 mil as well as a regular, and then an assortment of extensions, right? Swivel heads, extensions, everything. And then this is my little pin light that I used, right? So looking down the rail to correlate and see where the head of the stud that goes down through the van, that's, you know, you need light to look around underneath the van. I've been doing this mostly in good light, but in any case, you definitely want multiple lights. So the last thing I will say is definitely wear eye protection. You're going to be drilling up under, and you know, shavings of metal are going to be falling down. And I highly recommend periodically, if you have a leaf blower or something, blow underneath the van out because you'll be rolling around on those shavings as you're cutting through that sheet metal and stuff. If you have a creeper or something that you can easily slide under the van, that'll help as well. So that pretty much wraps up my method on removing the rails from the van in a passenger Chevy Express van. So what am I going to do with it now? Well, for now, I'm just going to clean up the holes and put paint over them and then duct tape individually over the holes. The reason why I'm not going to plug them just yet is because I'm going to use these holes for the L-track that I'll be mounting my bike to. So I see a lot of guys do wooden floors, plywood floors that have like either glued down or plywood fairing strips or whatever the case may be, and then they screw their L-track into the plywood. I'm really not about that. I want, if I get into a collision, I want the bike to be attached to the body and or the hardest part of the body or the frame as much as possible. So one thing about these rails on the underside that I noticed is these rails on the underside of this part of the body, it is thickened in certain places because the rail's bolting to it. You know, they're not bolting the seat rails to the frame of the vehicle, they're bolting it to the body, but they're bolting it in reinforced portions of the body, multiple places. So I want to reuse these holes in some of these. Obviously I'm not going to be able to use all of them, but why drill new holes into unreinforced portions of the body if I can just reuse them when the time comes to mount down my track? Another thing is you'll notice these holes align horizontally and vertically across the van. Super helpful. This is mostly the cargo area of the van, so I have an assortment of places to be able to reutilize these holes if needed. Also, some of the bracketry, like these guys here, I can reuse those maybe. We'll see. Those went on 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, those sections of the underbody. So I'm going to keep some of that stuff, and I'm going to keep this in mind as I move forward. I hope this was informative for you guys. I hope it helped. You know, the passenger vans are kind of one of those things where people kind of shy away from them just because they have to deal with the rail system and removing the interior and some of that stuff. So I get it. This is why, you know, I knew what I was getting into whenever I bought the passenger van. And I just, you know, inspected it and said, this is the technique I'm going to try. So there's lots of techniques out there. I hope this helps somebody. I hope you guys get on 2 wheels and ride a dirt bike. This is Accelerate once again, signing off.